Yo, what's up? Dr. Swole here, MD, pro physique athlete. Today I'm going to be giving you a definitive guide on how to bulk and cut. Learning how to bulk and cut properly is key for building your dream physique. But I see a lot of people getting it wrong at all levels, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. Today I'll be teaching you how to set up your bulking phases as well as fat loss phases. And I'll be giving you a beginner strategy as well as a more intermediate to advanced strategy. First of all, let's talk about the rationale for the bulking and cutting strategy. The first thing we need to grasp is that there is an optimal body fat percentage range. I typically say it's around 10 to 15% for men and 18 to 25% for women. There are a few reasons that I suggest this optimal body fat percentage range. Once you start going well below this range, you may run into negative side effects of low body fat. Your body does need a certain amount of fat to stay healthy. When you start getting really shredded, like contest lean for bodybuilders, you start running into issues like poor mood and energy, lowered performance in the gym, low libido, and possibly losing your period for women. So we want to avoid really low body fat percentages. When you do run into obese level body fat, your hormones may be affected, and this will also be negative for health. Within the more intermediate ranges of body fat percentage, there probably isn't that much difference for actual muscle growth, but there are some indirect advantages here. First of all, when you're in this lower end of body fat percentages, you're better able to track progress over time. When you're able to see your abs for guys or have that hourglass shape for women, you're much better able to see body fat getting put on. Once you start having a belly, it gets harder and harder to see how much fat that you're hiding in it. Next, staying in this lower body fat percentage range is probably going to be better for health. I do think it's going to be healthier for you in the long term if you stay in the lower end of your body fat settling range. Finally, lower body fat percentages just are more aesthetic and you're going to be more motivated seeing those results in the mirror. Next concept. When it comes to bulking and cutting, if your goal is maximum muscle growth, a calorie surplus is going to be optimal for hypertrophy. This is because you're going to signal to your body that you have lots of nutrients around to build muscle and you're just going to have more raw materials available. This becomes more and more important as you get more advanced. If you're a beginner, say in your first 1 to 2 years of training, it's very possible to build muscle in a calorie deficit. But as an advanced bodybuilder, you probably aren't going to be building muscle in a calorie deficit or even at maintenance, and you really do need that calorie surplus to drive muscle growth. This is a mistake a lot of people run into because they try and just gaintain all the time, even to their advanced years. Keeping your calories at maintenance will work for a while as you body recomp. That is, you'll build muscle and lose fat at the same time, but as you get into an advanced level, this strategy won't work anymore. If you're bulking and cutting, why not just bulk forever then? The issue with bulking is that you will gain some fat when you're in a surplus. The amount of muscle versus the amount of fat you gain will get less and less as you become more advanced. As a beginner, a good amount of what you gain will be muscle, but at the intermediate level and beyond, most of it is actually going to be fat. So this is an issue if we want to stay in our optimal body fat percentage range because your body fat is going to slowly tick up over time. Next concept here. When it comes to bulking and cutting, it's harder to build muscle than it is to lose fat. This is crucial for us to understand because it tells us how important bulking phases are. That is, you really want to maximize the amount of time you spend bulking because this is when you really build muscle. Next, it is very possible for you to lose fat while still building or maintaining muscle mass. Once you understand these points, you can put together our strategy for bulking and cutting. Bulking phases is where most of the action happens in terms of muscle growth. Then during our fat loss phases, we strip away the fat while maintaining or continuing to build muscle. And we want to spend as much time in a calorie surplus to build muscle as possible. Now that we understand these concepts, let's look at what a bulking and cutting phase looks like. This is what bulking and cutting should look like. Over the x-axis we have time and over the y-axis we have muscle in blue and body fat in red. These two hash marks show us our optimal body fat percentage range. Now you'll see that these are our bulking phases and these two short phases are our cutting phases. Let's look at body fat first. During our bulking phase, we are going to be building muscle, but we will be gaining some fat. So that's where this upslope comes from. And eventually you're going to reach the upper limit of your optimal body fat percentage range. At this point, you're going to go through a fat loss phase where you strip away that fat. Looking at muscle, you'll see that we're building muscle mass throughout our bulk. And this is because that calorie surplus is optimal for hypertrophy. But here during our fat loss phase, our muscle mass stays constant. That is, we're able to maintain our muscle mass very well. And if you are a beginner, this muscle mass would continue to increase during your fat loss phase. During the next cycle of the bulk and cut, we basically repeat the same thing. But notice that our body fat is always staying within this optimal range while we gain muscle with each bulking phase. We're able to keep that muscle that we gained during our fat loss phases even while we're stripping away fat. The other thing I wanted to note here is that we want to have longer bulking phases than cutting phases. And that's because this is where all the action happens in terms of muscle growth. So you can imagine if we spent a long time in these cutting phases where we're not really building a lot of muscle, we'd be wasting time. You'll also see that we can lose fat relatively quickly here, and it takes a lot less time to strip away the fat that we've gained during our bulking phase than it took to actually gain it. So fat loss can be a relatively quick process, while muscle building is a slow process. Okay, let's talk about our beginner strategy for bulking and cutting. First of all, in terms of the length of your bulking phases, I recommend that you bulk for at least 3 months consecutively. You really want to have some longer uninterrupted periods of bulking where you can really build muscle. As we said, muscle growth is a slow process, and it takes time for your body to actually put together the structure of muscle tissue. So this is why I recommend a minimum of at least 3 months in a bulking phase. In general, your bulking phases can last anywhere between 3 to 12 months. I've heard of people who will try and bulk for a few weeks and then cut for a couple weeks. This is not optimal because you really need that time to actually build muscle tissue, and it also really helps with training. Being in a calorie surplus is helpful for building strength, and if you have frequent fat loss phases, this could interrupt your progress in the gym. And I want everyone to be lean bulking. Lean bulking is the process of maximizing muscle growth while minimizing the additional fat loss gained. We all have a maximum rate at which we're able to build muscle, and this changes depending on your level of experience. Beginners will be able to build at a faster rate and more advanced people at a slower rate. But once you maximize muscle growth, any additional weight that you gain is just going to be fat. So my goal for lean bulking is to be in enough of a calorie surplus where we're still gaining all that muscle with as little additional fat as possible. For beginners, in terms of your rate of bulking, I recommend going for about 1 to 1.5% of your body weight gained per month. If you weigh 200 pounds, 1% of your body weight would be 2 pounds, so that would be gaining 2 pounds per month or 0.5 pounds per week. I think somewhere around 1% is a really good starting point. If it's your very first fat loss phase, I'd recommend starting off at the lower end of this range, like 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per week. For our 200-pound athlete, if you're losing 0.5% per week, that's 1 pound of weight loss per week. I suggest lower rates of fat loss for beginners because you just don't have that experience yet. Your first calorie deficit will be hard because your body's not used to being in that state. As you become more experienced, your body will get used to feeling hungry, and your diet and training program will get better over time, so you're better able to maintain muscle mass. Now, if you do have a lot of weight to lose, let's say you're obese, then it is totally fine to aim for the higher range of this rate of fat loss, even going up to 2% of your body weight loss per week. And for people wondering about body recomposition, if you are a beginner, that is in your first 1 to 2 years, with these kinds of rates of loss, you will still be able to build muscle. So you can totally expect to continue building muscle even during your fat loss phases in a calorie deficit. There's a really important metric I want to introduce for bodybuilding, and that is the bulk to cut ratio. This is basically how much time you spend bulking compared to how much time you spend cutting. So for example, if you spent 2 months bulking for every 1 month cutting, that's a bulk to cut ratio of 2 to 1. If you spent 5 months bulking to 1 month cutting, that's 5 to 1. And if you're trying to optimize your physique, I recommend aiming for a bulk to cut ratio of at least 4 to 1. So that would be 4 months bulking to 1 month cutting. Notice that I say at least here. So as you become more experienced, you want to increase your bulk to cut ratio. And in general, I recommend trying to maximize your bulk to cut ratio. This is because a calorie surplus is the best state for hypertrophy. Even if you're a beginner and you're able to body recomp, that is, you'll still build muscle during your fat loss phases, those calorie deficit phases are not going to be optimal for muscle growth. So you really want to be trying to spend as much time in your bulking phases as possible. Here's an example of a bulking and cutting phase for a beginner. Say we have a 200-pound athlete. Their bulking phase lasts for 4 months and they're gaining 2 pounds per month. So that's 1% of their body weight gained per month. Over this 4-month bulk, they'll gain 8 pounds. Now remember that a proportion of this is going to be fat and a proportion muscle. So during our cutting phase, we strip away the fat. So they have a 1-month cut where they lose 1 pound per week. And this is basically 0.5% of their body weight lost per week. This means that they lose 4 pounds during their cut, and throughout the bulking and cutting cycle, they gained 4 pounds. Now, how do you know that you actually gained 4 pounds of muscle here? You'd have to look at yourself visually. So basically at the end of this cut, are you at the same body fat percentage as when you started initially? You'll have to be very honest with yourself here. So assess your physique in the same lighting conditions at the same time of day. And keep in mind that the actual amount of muscle tissue you gain over time will vary a lot depending on the person. So don't assume that these exact numbers will apply to you. Okay, now let's talk about intermediate to advanced people. So intermediates would be people who've been training for around 3 to 5 years seriously. And for advanced, I tend to say over around 5 years of serious training. First of all, for your bulking phases, I'd recommend your bulking phases last longer than that of beginners, somewhere in the range of like 5 to 12 months. My general recommendation is quite wide, between 3 to 12 months, but as you become advanced, you really want to be pushing towards those longer bulking phases. And to permit those longer bulking phases, you want to lean bulk at an even more conservative rate. So I recommend gaining weight at a rate of 0.5 to 1% of your body weight per month. And it's this slower rate of weight gain that allows you to have those longer bulking phases. As at advanced levels and natural, you're not going to be gaining muscle at a very fast rate. So even something small like 0.5% of your body weight gained per month is probably still going to maximize muscle growth. But if you gain weight at a rate faster than this, you're going to have to waste time later losing it during your fat loss phases. Next, with fat loss for intermediate to advanced people, the range is still around the same as for beginners, 0.5 to 1.5% of your body weight lost per week. But I'd recommend pushing towards that higher end of the range. As you become more advanced, you're going to be more experienced and better able to handle that calorie deficit. Plus, since your training and diet protocols are going to be better, you're going to be better able to maintain muscle mass. Finally, bulk to cut ratio, a minimum of 4 to 1. But for intermediate to advanced athletes, you really should be pushing higher numbers. For example, for myself, my bulk to cut ratio is a bit over 10 to 1. I spent around 8 months bulking and then just 3 weeks cutting. Here's an example of what bulking and cutting might look like for an advanced athlete. So this person weighs 200 pounds. During their lean bulking phase, they gain 1 pound per month. 1% of their body weight of 200 pounds would be 2 pounds. So 1 pound is 0.5% of their body weight gain per month. At the low end of our recommended lean bulking range. And with this slow rate of gain, they're able to bulk for 11 months in a row. They gained 11 pounds. And then during a fat loss phase, they cut for 1 month, losing 2 pounds per week, which is 1% of their body weight lost per week. During this 1 month period, they're able to lose 8 pounds and they're able to very efficiently strip away the fat that they gained while bulking. This is more at the upper end of how long you'd run your bulking phases. But you can see that this person only has to worry about cutting for 1 month out of the year. And their bulk to cut ratio here is actually 11 to 1. So make sure that as you become more advanced, you are tweaking your bulking and cutting strategy to optimize gains over time. If you want to learn more about optimizing hypertrophy and fat loss over time, check out my newest book, Advanced Hypertrophy Periodization, where I talk about how to really structure your bulking and cutting phases across the calendar year and optimize your training for max muscle growth. This is very high level information and I think it'll be really helpful for someone who's been training for a few years. If you want to learn more about the bulk to cut ratio, check out this video where I explain it more in depth. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for more top-notch hypertrophy advice, and we'll see you next time.